Well, hi there and welcome back. Welcome to this limited edition set of 1225 live episodes. Today I'm coming to you from the basement of my house, actually. And what we're doing here, just to remind you again, is we're providing extended discussions on the preaching passages that we are working through in our current sermon series on the book of Ruth. Every Monday, 12 p.m., we'll be back here for these brief episodes. Yesterday, in our sermon on Ruth chapter 1, verses 6 through 15, we were in the part of the story where Naomi and Ruth and Orpah are now heading back from Moab toward Judah. And Naomi tries very hard to persuade both Ruth and Orpah to return, to go back to the land of Moab. Now, all I want to do here today is to hopefully show you something of the thickness, the richness of the Bible, to show you how that part of the Ruth story connects beautifully with other parts of the scriptures. And so we begin here by noting the many interesting parallels between that part of the Ruth story, Ruth 1 through 6 through 15, and another story later that happens later in the history of Israel in Scripture, and that's the story of David coming out of Jerusalem, trying to escape his son Absalom. 2 Samuel chapter 15. Now, starting with the story of Ruth, the section again that we looked at yesterday in the sermon, let's just talk about the basics of what we have there. We have this Judean woman, Naomi, who is now coming out of Moab, going back toward Judah with her two daughters-in-law. Ruth and Orpah are with her. And Naomi, the Judean, is trying to persuade these two foreign women, these two Moabites, trying to discourage them from going with her and continuing with her over to Judah. Well, when we consider 2 Samuel chapter 15, what do we have there? We have another Judean person, this time David, and David is actually traveling in the opposite direction from where Naomi had been traveling. In David's case, he's traveling out of Judah, out of Jerusalem, and as he travels, David is trying to persuade a foreigner, in this case a foreign man, named Ittai, who is a Philistine. David is trying to persuade Ittai to go back, to not follow David any further. And if you remember from yesterday's sermon, if you were with us, 3 or 4 times as Naomi and Ruth and Orpah are traveling on the road, Naomi says to her daughters-in-law, Shuv, that is, return, go back, stop following me. Well, in the case of David in 2 Samuel 15, very interestingly, he uses the word shuv a couple of times, talking to Ittai, telling Ittai, go back, stop following me. So definite parallels here between these two stories. Well, as it turned out, in Ittai's case, he was not persuaded by David. Listen to what he says in 2 Samuel chapter 15, verse 21. Ittai says to David, as Yahweh lives, as my lord the king lives, wherever my lord the king shall be, whether for death or for life, there also will your servant be. And of course, what Ittai says there to David bears striking similarities with what the foreigner Ruth says to Naomi in the book of Ruth chapter 1. Listen to what the foreigner Ruth says to Naomi. She says, very famously, where you go, I will go, and where you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people, and your God, my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. May Yahweh do so to me, and more also, if anything but death parts me from you. So the foreigner Ruth and the foreigner Ittai, in both stories, they sound very similar to one another. Both of them pledge steadfast allegiance to a Judean. Both of them invoke the name Yahweh as they are talking to their respective Judeans. And both of them also in these passages talk about being loyal to death. Now, fanning out, going out even broader in the canon of Scripture, what's interesting is this, that on this very same plot of ground, essentially, that David and Ittai are standing on having their conversation, much, much later on in the time of Jesus, Peter and the disciples are standing virtually on the same piece of ground, and they say this to Jesus. This is Matthew 26, verse 35. It says this, Peter said to Jesus, "Even if I must die with you, I will not deny you." And all the disciples said the same. So here we have Peter, who is an Israelite himself. He's also, just like Ruth, just like Ittai, he's pledging allegiance to a Judean, to the person of Jesus. In Peter's case, of course, we know he failed, didn't he? He failed to live up to his pledge, but Jesus ended up being so sweetly merciful to him after Peter's denial. But now in the case of both Ruth and Ittai, both of them ended up living up to the pledges that they had made, in fact. In Ruth's case, of course, she stays steadfastly loyal to Naomi and is richly rewarded for that. In Ittai's case, his loyalty to David was rewarded with David making Ittai the leader of an entire battalion in 2 Samuel 18, verse 2. Now, in this very trialsome period of time that we are all living through right now, it is a tremendous blessing, is it not, if we have in our lives Ittai's, Ruth's, loyal friends, people who stick with us even in the darkest hours of our lives. And it's also good for us to work at being a Ruth or an Ittai. Someone who is a loyal friend, someone who is enduringly faithful to a friend who is walking through a very dark hour. Now, fair weather friends, of course, they come and go, right? But who can you identify in your life who is not a fair weather friend, who is like an Ittai or like a Ruth? Do you have somebody like that in your life? If you have been blessed that way, I would just encourage you to thank God, because that person actually is God's gift to you. Thank God for that person, and also maybe pick up the phone or get on Messenger and just send the person a message or talk to them and say, hey, this is what you mean in my life. I love you. Thanks for being such a loyal friend. And finally, do be praying for God's help in becoming an imitator of Jesus. Jesus, in terms of friendship, he is the friend who sticks closer than a brother. All of us want to be transformed into his image daily, which means becoming better friends to those around us. So be blessed this week, cherish your friends, and we will see you next Monday, Lord willing.